For 18 years, my husband and I lived a simple shared life, always splitting everything 50-50. But everything changed 4 years ago when he inherited a massive fortune from his mother. Suddenly, we're living in a new house, and his financial situation has skyrocketed. But nothing in our relationship has changed. He still charges me rent every month, and I'm left working 40+ hours a week while he enjoys his retirement, indulging in hobbies I can't even afford to try. How did we go from being equal partners to this? And is it wrong for me to want things to go back to how they were? For 18 years, my husband and I built our life together from the ground up. We started out with little, both working modest jobs in California, each earning around $40,000 a year. Our life wasn't flashy, but it was ours. We lived in rented apartments, scraped by to make ends meet, but we were happy in our simple routine. We split all our expenses evenly, never once arguing about money. Rent, gas, utilities, groceries, everything was 50-50. I always appreciated how we avoided the financial stress that seemed to plague many of our friends' relationships. We weren't wealthy, but we had a sense of pride in being self-sufficient and avoiding the constant financial squabbles that seemed to ruin so many marriages. I worked hard to improve my career, and eventually, my efforts paid off. I got a better-paying job and was able to save a little. My credit score soared to near perfect, and life felt stable. There was no excess, but we made do, and I thought we were doing great. When we got married 6 years ago, things seemed to be moving in the right direction. But that's when I had to sign the prenup. I didn't mind it at first. He asked me to sign a thorough agreement that stated in the event of a breakup, we would each leave with only what we had personally acquired during our time together. I agreed without much hesitation, thinking it was just a smart move, considering how cautious my husband was when it came to money and assets. At the time, it made sense. We didn't have much, after all, but the reality of that agreement would come back to haunt me later. Our modest life took a dramatic turn 4 years ago when my husband's mother passed away unexpectedly. It was a loss that shook him, as he had already lost his father when he was young. His mother had always been a pillar in his life, but her sudden death left him with not just grief, but a massive inheritance that he wasn't prepared for. I never saw it coming, and neither did he. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was property. My husband discovered that not only did his mother own a home, but also a sizable lot next to an upscale Hilton hotel that was desperate to expand. After her death, my husband and his sister sold the land for a cool $8 million each. This windfall turned our financial landscape upside down, but I had no idea what was coming next. We moved into a new house, a beautiful place, and I was led to believe that maybe, just maybe, now that we had more financial security, I wouldn't have to pay rent anymore. After all, we had no mortgage to worry about, and I assumed he'd want to share his good fortune with me, as we had always shared everything before. But when the first of the month rolled around, I was shocked. He told me my rent would actually go up. I had thought that with the sale of his mother's property, we'd be free of rent altogether, but instead, I was told that the new house came with higher property taxes and utilities. My rent increased to $1,800 a month, higher than what we had paid previously. It wasn't an outrageous amount by the standards of the area, but it felt like a slap in the face. I was making $80,000 a year now, so I could afford it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had no idea how to process this. We were now living in a large, beautiful home, but my husband was still charging me rent. That wasn't the worst part. What bothered me more was the idea that our financial situation had changed so drastically, yet nothing about our relationship had. I wasn't sure if he even saw what was happening. The change in our life after my husband's inheritance was nothing short of drastic. 4 years ago, when his mother passed away, it was a shock to both of us. Losing a parent is never easy, especially when it happens so unexpectedly. My husband had always been very close to his mother, so her death hit him hard. I did my best to support him, but I had no idea just how much this loss would alter the course of our future. I remember the day he told me about the inheritance. It was a quiet evening, and we were sitting on the couch, his face pale as he explained how his mother had left behind not just a house, but a valuable piece of land next to a Hilton hotel. He told me how they sold the land for $8 million. I was happy for him, even though a part of me felt a little uneasy. It was a huge sum, one that would change everything, and I wondered how it might affect our relationship. At first, things seemed fine. He told me he was going to buy us a house, a place we could finally call our own. It felt like a dream come true, especially after years of renting. I thought that finally, we could settle down in a home where we didn't have to worry about paying rent every month. After all, we had just come into a windfall. I was relieved, thinking that the financial burden would be lifted, that maybe now, with all this money, we could relax and enjoy the good life. But as the days passed, my relief quickly turned into confusion. He told me that we were going to buy the house under his name, in accordance with the prenup we had signed years earlier. It was something I agreed to, not thinking much of it at the time. We had always been clear that we kept our finances separate, and I respected that. But then came the shock. When we moved into the new house, the rent I was asked to pay didn't decrease, it actually increased. I remember the conversation clearly. He told me that due to the higher utilities and property taxes on the new house, my rent would now be $1,800 a month. I was stunned. I had assumed that with the sale of his mother's property and the new house, there would be no more rent. After all, he was now a millionaire, and I was just working my regular job. I couldn't understand why I was still being asked to pay such a high amount. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it. I had been making $80,000 a year at that point, and I could manage the higher rent, but it felt wrong. Why was I still paying rent when he had so much money now? The situation didn't add up. He was living in luxury, enjoying his retirement while I was working long hours, trying to keep up. My days consisted of endless work, and his days were filled with leisure activities, golf, sailing, and elaborate weekend trips with friends. It seemed like he was in no rush to include me in any of it. The stark contrast between our lives started to feel like a slap in the face. He was enjoying all the benefits of his inheritance while I continued to work, paying him rent as if nothing had changed. I had always worked hard to build a life with him, and now I couldn't help but wonder if I was just a tenant in the house he bought with his newfound wealth. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was losing a part of what we had before, the equality, the partnership. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was taking advantage of the situation. He was retired, living off his mother's inheritance, while I was stuck working and paying rent to him every month. And the worst part was that I was starting to feel invisible in my own life. Was this the future I had to look forward to? Was I just going to keep working while he continued to indulge in his hobbies without a care in the world? As the months passed, the gulf between my husband and me seemed to widen. I kept working long hours, my days packed with meetings, emails, and deadlines, while he lived his new life of luxury, spending his days on the golf course, sailing on weekends, and taking trips with friends. Each time he came home from one of his getaways, it felt like a punch to the gut. There I was, sitting at the kitchen table, buried in my work while he waltzed in, tanned from a week-long sailing trip, telling me all about the wonderful time he'd had. I would smile and ask him how it was, but inside, I felt like I was slowly dying. I tried to push my feelings aside, convincing myself that I was being unreasonable. After all, he had been through so much, losing his mother, dealing with the grief, and suddenly inheriting this unimaginable wealth. He deserved to enjoy his life, I thought. He'd worked hard for his success, even if it came through a series of fortunate events. And yet, as I watched him live out his dream retirement, I couldn't help but feel resentful. The resentment festered, especially when I looked at my bank account and saw how little progress I had made on my own savings. My husband's inheritance was enough to keep us both comfortable for a lifetime, and yet I was still paying rent. $1,800 a month, no less, a sum that could have gone toward my retirement savings, or even a vacation for myself. I had no idea what it was like to just take time off and relax. I was constantly working, my dreams of financial independence slipping further and further out of reach. The tipping point came one evening after dinner. We were sitting in the living room, watching TV. My husband was talking about his latest trip, a week-long cruise to the Caribbean with a group of his retired friends. He was animated, excited, but I couldn't focus on his words. My mind kept drifting to the pile of bills I still had to pay, the rent I was writing checks for every month, and the fact that he never seemed to think about any of it. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to him and said, "I don't understand. Why am I still paying rent? We have the money now. You have the money. Why can't we just live like we always wanted, without these financial boundaries between us?" His expression changed instantly. For a moment, I thought he didn't understand. Then he sighed and replied, "I don't know, it just feels right to keep things the way they've always been. We agreed on splitting everything, and I don't want to change that." His words stung. We agreed on splitting everything? I had always respected his need for financial independence, but it felt different now. This wasn't about splitting groceries or rent anymore. This was about him having everything, and me working my fingers to the bone to keep up. I couldn't help but feel like I was a stranger in my own home, like I was nothing more than a roommate paying rent to a man who I thought was my partner. I didn't want to fight about money, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had given up. My dreams of retirement, my savings, my sense of equality in our relationship, all of it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I asked him cautiously, "Do you think you could share some of that wealth with me? Not in a way that feels like charity, but as a partner, someone you love and want to build a future with." The silence in the room was deafening. He didn't answer immediately, and the longer he took to respond, the more I felt my heart sinking. Was I asking too much? Shouldn't we be in this together? What had happened to the partnership we had once promised each other, back when we were struggling side by side? I didn't want his money. I didn't want half of everything. I just wanted us to be equal again. The silence that hung between us after I asked him to share his wealth felt suffocating. My heart raced as I waited for his response, but instead of the reassurance I had hoped for, he just sat there, staring at the floor. For a moment, I regretted speaking up. Maybe I had asked for too much, maybe it was too soon, or maybe I had crossed a line I didn't know existed. Finally, he cleared his throat, his voice tight when he spoke. "I just think it's important to keep things the way they were," he said, looking at me now with an expression I couldn't quite place. "I don't want things to change, and I don't want to feel like I'm being pressured. We agreed to keep our finances separate, and I think that's the best way to go about it." His words hit me like a slap. I had hoped for something different, maybe a hint of understanding, a willingness to change with the times, to recognize that our relationship had grown, that his financial situation was no longer the same. But instead, it felt like he was telling me that the past 18 years of our life together meant nothing. The partnership we had built, the sacrifices we had both made, seemed to be reduced to a set of financial rules that no longer applied to the reality of our situation. It felt like he was choosing his money over me, over us. I could see the same indifference in his eyes that had been there for months, a look that told me he was comfortable with the status quo, with the way things were. He had the luxury of being retired, of enjoying his inheritance, while I continued to work, day in and day out, to make ends meet. I was the one left behind, trapped in a life that no longer felt like the one I had dreamed of. I didn't know what to say next. I had thought that if I just voiced my feelings, if I asked him for what I needed, he would understand. But instead, it felt like a wall had gone up between us. He was the one who had changed, not me, and now I was the one struggling to find my place in this new life. The next few days were tense. I went to work as usual, but my mind was consumed with thoughts of our conversation. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had dismissed my feelings, the way he had brushed aside my concerns about fairness and partnership. He didn't seem to understand that I wasn't asking for a handout. I wasn't asking him to give me his money or take care of me. I was simply asking for a chance to breathe, for the opportunity to have the same financial freedom he had. I wanted to retire too. I wanted to stop working just to survive. But as the days wore on, I realized that I had been wrong all along. I had assumed that the man I had loved for nearly 2 decades would be the same person after the inheritance. I had believed that we were partners, equals, and that we would always share everything. But now I was left questioning everything. I began to wonder if I had misjudged him, if I had been too naive to see that he was never going to change, no matter how much wealth he had. I had always respected his independence, but now it felt like that independence was being used to keep me at arm's length. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how alone I had become in this relationship. He was living his dream, and I was just surviving. I wasn't sure where to go from here. I didn't want to give up on us, but I also didn't want to spend the rest of my life feeling like a second-class citizen in my own home. Was it wrong for me to want a little equality, a little fairness? Or was I just being selfish, asking for something I wasn't entitled to? The answers seemed impossible to find. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about feeling invisible, like I wasn't even part of the future he was building. I couldn't help but wonder if he saw me as an inconvenience, a complication in his new life. I had always respected his need for independence, but this felt different. Now it felt like he was using his wealth to create a divide, to separate himself from me in ways I couldn't understand. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for by having this conversation with him. Would he even understand? Would he listen? Or would he dismiss me the way he had before, as though my needs and feelings didn't matter? The next day, I found myself pacing in our bedroom, mentally rehearsing what I would say. I had to confront him. I had to know where we stood. Was this really the life I was meant to accept? Was I just a tenant in my own home? And if that was the case, was it worth staying in this relationship? Or was it time to walk away and find something, or someone who would truly see me as an equal? I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I was at a crossroads. This moment, this conversation, could change everything. I wasn't ready for that change, but I knew I had no choice. I had to speak up, even if it meant risking everything. I couldn't live in this emotional limbo any longer.